Shalom, family. Shemani Laya. Thank you for joining me on Unsectarian Wisdom as usual. I'm a wise, wealthy, rich, celestial being that is loved by the Most High Creator. Let's go ahead and jump in, family. We're getting back into the lands of Mars and 178 worlds under the Great Dome. Chapter 2. Mars, a great zoo. Family, I already read over this, but I'm letting you know that some of this in this chapter 2 is information that we've already read over, but there's a little bit of new information. So just go ahead and follow along. Chapter 2, Mars, a great zoo. One of the most talked about planets in this last humanity and where more visits have been made since the beginning are the lands of Mars, who have received several humans during the timeline in the different post-reset beginnings. Today there is a large colony of humans on Mars, also dominated by the custodians and Anunnaki, but in a totally different way to the known lands. Since those who are there is by pure merit, by performing different tasks against their own race to achieve their one-way passage with no return. As we commented in previous books, the navigator who crossed the ice walls and Terra-Infinita extraterrestrial worlds and their civilizations, R.E. Bird, has been able to visit these lands on several occasions. And until the last thing that is known about him, he is still there living with his human colleagues and his gift for betraying his brothers. Although living in those lands has benefits such as being able to live 4 or 5 times more years than in the same land, not having the incredible amount of diseases that we have today in the known lands, and not having to worry about working or obtaining food as it is done here. It also has great negative points like being in permanent war with the neighboring races, Greys, Orion lands, some Draconian colony, or also known as Etamines, Draco lands, but also existed other races that were moved there during the conquest of the other worlds between the custodians and the Anunnaki beings. This kind of reminds me, family, of the movie John Carter, the Disney movie about the man who left Earth and went to Mars, John Carter. So, remember there were different races on Mars? There were even the human-like race. So, let's keep going. This is what R. Bird reported to the base after the first expedition that succeeded in crossing the extensive path between the Antarctic Passage and the one known today as Bird Passage that leads to the famous Mars lands. Upon returning and making contact again with the operators who were attentively awaiting information as to where the rear admiral really was, he told them that he had passed the 2 membrane fields, but that he had encountered problems during the passage to Mars. These lands are not similar to ours, not even after the first membrane. There is a force that pushes you and imprisons you in the chest when you enter. It was a sensation that I have never had before. This record was kept forever in a secret. This record was kept forever in the secret reports handled by the high military officials in the United States of America. Such was his confusion upon entering that he was almost immediately visited by beings from Orion, who accompanied him until he stepped on the lands of Area, the first lands near the passage. Bird was accompanied by a member of the custodians known as Nimrod, who obviously knew these lands very well and also spoke with the beings that inhabited, then gathered the human colony that at that time occupied another part of Area, but with time and some conflicts with other beings had to take refuge and inhabit the island away from the mainland. Former politicians, members of important agencies, and well-known characters from the past gave rise to one of the largest human gatherings within the misnamed Red Planet in this circle environment. There is no room for many humans, only for a handful of those who did homework for the custodians and earned their one-way ticket. You know what this also sounds like to me, family? That movie that came out at the beginning of the year with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and what's her name from Hunger Games, right? And the movie's called Don't Look Up, and it was about how an asteroid was coming to Earth, but all the politicians were lying to the people. to the civilian population, not telling them about what was really happening. So by the time the meteor came, it was too late and everybody died, except for a handful of politicians and rich people who were chosen, who were deemed important enough to get on a spaceship to fly away to another colony on another planet. This is what this sounds like, family. That movie, once again, that movie, don't look up on Netflix. It's actually very deep. If you get a chance, look at it. It's almost like reality what's going on right now, but most people look at it like it's just a movie when it's really telling the truth what's going on right before your eyes. Okay, let me get back. While at first inhospitable lands for even those who visited in the beginning, in recent times humans began to grow in numbers and adapt well to the island to carry on their development and allied communication with their neighbors. Having expanded their longevity, this leads them to be beings that learn many tasks and have much knowledge. Weapons technology of warfare is developed for attack and defense in conjunction with technology that was given to them by the custodians in ancient times. This sounds like the movie Elysium. Man, this sounds like a lot of movies, especially ones recently. There's a movie that came out, I think, on AMC recently about people who moved to Mars. So basically all the rich people moved to Mars and everybody who isn't rich or isn't deemed as important had to stay on Earth, a dying planet. While some humans and other beings might be aware of the ideas that the custodians and Anunnaki leaders have about the use of the Mars lands, they would never rebel against them. More so considering that returning to the known lands would also not be a big deal for those who manage to leave. In short, these lands are considered as in a great zoo, where they study the different behaviors, confrontations, and conflict resolutions, a huge farm of exhaustive monitoring and analysis of races. In their past, they did it in the so-called clone lands, or second Earth, but then the plan was abandoned for various reasons that we will analyze in depth later in other books. But it is worthwhile because you can draw several conclusions of how these parasitic races think and why they abandon lands. It could be a starting point in the analysis of the lands where we live and those around us. Alright, family, that's the end of chapter 2. I'll catch you next time. I enjoyed you. I hope you enjoyed me. Be blessed.